On the chair. Wait, quiet. Education, schools, and learning. Introduction. Many people have views about what constitutes a good education, including parents, children, practitioners, policymakers, politicians, and researchers, all of whom have a vested interest in how children and young people learn. While most agree that education is important, not all agree on what, how, where, and when it should happen. Indeed, ideas about want counts as good are widely debated, although receiving an education is closely associated with going to school. Learning can happen in a broader range of contexts, places, and spaces. A narrow view of education as a product of schooling and as one that can be bought and consumed in a marketplace, precisely measured and neatly ranked, seems to imply that learning itself is a one-way exchange and that children and young people and their social worlds do not matter. As this chapter will examine, receiving an education in all its possible varieties is not a neutral process. This chapter will introduce some of the key perspectives that shape how place, features of education, schooling, and learning in children and young people lives are understood through the interdisciplinary lenses of psychology, philosophy, sociology. It considers how education impacts on children and young people and their communities and its effects on inequalities. A good education. The promise of a formal education to transform children, their communities, and whole societies is now a worldwide project. The right to free and compulsory primary education is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations Convention of Rights of the Child, introduced in Chapter 1. While increasing access to and completing primary education is a priority for global organizations like the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, the accessibility of formal primary and secondary education varies across the world. In the UK, education is compulsory, but formal schooling is not. As a signatory of the UNCRC, the UK's devolved governments in its 4 nations play a role in ensuring that parents or caregivers can fulfill their duty to provide their children with an education. Almost all children in the UK receive their education at school, but a small number of families choose otherwise via elective home education or homeschooling, as it is also known. Elvis, on the chair. In setting out parental duties to ensure children receive compulsory education. Elvis! Lay down. Different pieces of legislation state that education should be both suitable and efficient for the age, ability, aptitude, and any additional learning needs a child may have. As an example, Section 7 of the 1996 Education Act, which applies to England and Wales, states the following: the parent of every child of compulsory school age shall cause him to receive efficient full-time education, suitable. A, to his age, ability, and aptitude, and B, to any special educational needs in the case of a child who is in the area of a local authority in England, or additional learning needs in the case of a child who is in the area of the local authority in Wales. He may have either be regular attendance at school or otherwise. Yet within these complex legal frameworks, there is no universal or agreed definition of what counts as suitable and efficient education, and by extension, a good education. For children and young people, their parents, communities, and whole societies, education has multiple goals. Many centre on the assumption that receiving an education will transform learners and societies into positive ways. Some stakeholders argue that a good education should provide children and young people with specific skills, qualifications, or knowledge so that they can access certain kinds of employment. A broader perspective suggests that education should aim to give young people cultural values that will enable them to lead fulfilling, independent lives, to participate in democracy, and to make autonomous and ethical choices. Gaining a sense of self confidence and belonging and being able to express themselves freely might be another key purpose. There are many competing ideas about what should or should not count as suitable and efficient education for children and young people, or how and indeed why adults have built systems to educate them. Fairness and education. From the ages of 5 to 16 years, most children and young people in the UK spend a significant proportion of their lives learning and socialising in a formal education setting. Being schooled, therefore, plays a prominent role in their experience and in their social, emotional, and cognitive development. While the school leaving age differs across the UK, this pathway is typically marked by a series of transitions that generally occurs at the ages as shown in figure 7.2. While the exact forms and types of education settings differ significantly across the four nations, several education reforms have produced what is now a highly complex and diverse collection. And the many forms of UK education settings include those shown in figure 7.3. There is a considerable variation in how these settings are funded, whether they are run by central government, local authorities, community groups, or charities. Some schools also differ in the extent to which they follow a national curriculum, a set of subjects and uniform standards for study and attainment with a formal programme. Of study in state-funded primary and secondary schools, the ethos and the degree to which each criteria and which entry criteria are based on selection on the basis of gender, faith, or perceived ability. E.g., grammar schools are selective in some of the 4 UK nations. The increasing diversity of some school types, such as state-funded, faith-based schools, and the continued existence of fee-paying schools continues to be the subject of debate among policymakers and educationalists, with contrasting perspectives about what counts as fair and how best to ensure the education promotes equal opportunities for all. These questions seem to raise even further questions rather than mutually agreed answers. Does fairness mean ensuring that all children and young people have access to the same modes of education? Here there is a deeper philosophical debate whether education is a public good for societies like national health services, but for learning, or private matter for individuals to personalize and manage in their homes and communities. As children and young people in the UK progress through formal schooling, standardized testing at various stages features heavily in the experiences. Words like measurement, outcomes, effectiveness dominate when politicians, the media, and the public discuss what good looks like. Educationalists such as Gert Bajester are critical of what has become a narrow set of criteria, such as the numerical grades achieved in mathematics, science, and English as part of the formal examinations in UK secondary schooling to judge the value of children and young people's achievements via education. Key points. What counts as a suitable and efficient and good education is broad and debated. Education has many purposes, including to increase opportunities and to make societies fair and more equal. It can be considered as both a private and a public good. Systems of education across the 4 UK nations are diverse.